The untold stories of ADX Florence inmates. Imagine a prison so secure that even the most dangerous terrorists, cartel leaders, and spies vanish into silence the moment they enter. A place where inmates spend 23 hours a day in concrete cells, cut off almost entirely from the outside world. This is not a scene from a dystopian film. It's real. Welcome to ADX Florence, also known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. But while the headlines often focus on the crimes that landed people here, what happens after sentencing is rarely discussed. Today, we pull back the curtain on the hidden lives, routines, and struggles of the men who live inside the most secure federal prison in America. Before we dive into today's powerful story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales. Your support helps us keep sharing these stories, and we wouldn't want you to miss any of the action. Now, let's get started. What is ADX Florence? The United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, ADX Florence, was opened in 1994 in Florence, Colorado. Built after a series of violent incidents in other federal prisons, its purpose was simple: create a place where inmates deemed too dangerous for other facilities could be permanently controlled. U.S. Bureau of Prisons, official records. The prison sits on 37 acres of land and is designed with layers of surveillance, security doors, and motion detectors. Every movement of every prisoner is tracked. Cells are made of reinforced concrete, with small, slit-like windows angled toward the sky so inmates cannot see the surrounding mountains or plains. New York Times, 2015. The facility holds just over 340 inmates, a small number compared to other federal prisons, but each prisoner here is considered a high-risk threat to national security, law enforcement, or other inmates. Bureau of Prisons data, 2023. The life inside, the daily life of an inmate at ADX Florence is marked by isolation. Prisoners spend 22 to 23 hours per day in solitary confinement in 7 by 12-foot concrete cells. Amnesty International, 2014. These cells contain a concrete bed, a desk, a stool, and a combination sink toilet. Meals are slid through a slot in the steel door. Exercise happens for 1 hour per day, alone, in a small recreation pen, sometimes called a dog run, with concrete walls and a barred roof overhead. Inmates can see only the sky, never the open horizon. Human Rights Watch, 2017. The design reflects the Bureau of Prisons' philosophy: absolute control. Even books and personal items are restricted, and communication with the outside world is tightly monitored. For some prisoners, this means decades with little to no human interaction. Who ends up here? ADX. Florence houses some of the most infamous names in modern history. These include Ramzi Yousef, the mastermind of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, U.S. v. Yousef, 1998. Richard Reid, known as the Shoe Bomber for his failed attempt to blow up an American Airlines flight in 2001, BBC, 2002. Zacarias Moussaoui, the only person convicted in the U.S. for direct involvement in the 9/11 attacks, Department of Justice, 2006. El Chapo, Joaquin Guzmán Loera, the Mexican drug cartel leader who was extradited to the U.S. and sentenced to life plus 30 years in 2019, DOJ, 2019. But alongside terrorists and cartel leaders are spies, gang leaders, and violent offenders who attacked guards or inmates in other prisons. Each man has a different story, but they share one common fate: near total isolation. The debate on solitary confinement. Critics argue that the level of isolation at ADX Florence amounts to psychological torture. In 2014, Amnesty International called conditions there harsh and inhumane, pointing to cases of severe mental health decline among inmates. Amnesty International, 2014. According to court documents from lawsuits filed by prisoners, some developed hallucinations, paranoia, or self-harming behaviors after years in solitary. Cunningham v. Federal Bureau of Prisons, 2012. The Bureau of Prisons has defended its practices, stating that ADX Florence is necessary to protect staff, inmates, and the public from individuals who have proven themselves too violent or dangerous for less secure environments. BOP Statements, 2015. The Hidden Stories. While the public knows the crimes that put these men behind bars, less is reported about their existence inside. How does a cartel boss adapt to life in a cell no bigger than a parking space? What happens to a man who once commanded thousands but now speaks only to guards through a steel door? Some inmates, according to investigative reporting by the New York Times and 60 Minutes, try to maintain routines, push-ups, reading law books, or writing letters. Others withdraw, rarely speaking, their voices hoarse from disuse. And then there are the unconfirmed stories. Whispers from former guards about coded messages, improvised communication through drain pipes, and men who, despite isolation, still manage to exert influence beyond the walls. Ramzi Yousef, the architect of terror. Ramzi Yousef arrived at ADX Florence in 1998 after being convicted for orchestrating the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, which killed 6 people and injured more than 1,000. U.S. v. Yousef, 1998. Yousef was also tied to plots to bomb U.S. airliners in the Pacific in what became known as the Bohinca Plot, Associated Press, 1997. For federal authorities, his intelligence, resourcefulness, and ties to extremist networks made him one of the most dangerous prisoners in U.S. custody. Inside ADX, Yousef has been held under the Special Administrative Measures, SAMS program, which imposes strict controls on communication. SAMs are designed to prevent inmates from sending instructions to outside networks. U.S. Department of Justice, 2006. According to reports from Amnesty International and verified in federal filings, Yousef's daily existence mirrors the extreme isolation typical at ADX. 23 hours in his cell, 1 hour in a recreation pen, and monitored interactions with attorneys or officials only. Public records note no confirmed incidents of violent behavior from him since his incarceration. Richard Reid, the shoe bomber. Richard Reid, a British citizen, earned global notoriety in December 2001 when he attempted to detonate explosives hidden in his shoes aboard American Airlines Flight 63 from Paris to Miami. His plan failed when passengers and crew subdued him, and the bomb did not ignite. BBC News, 2002. Reid was sentenced to life in prison without parole in 2003, U.S. v. Reid, 2003. His case remains one of the earliest high-profile post-9/11 terrorism prosecutions in the U.S. At ADX Florence, Reid has been reported to live under the same SAMS restrictions as Yousef. According to Bureau of Prisons filings, his communication is limited to attorneys and a small list of pre-approved family contacts, and all mail is screened. Department of Justice, 2006. Like many ADX inmates, verified information about his daily behavior is scarce. Journalistic investigations, including a 2015 New York Times feature, note that his days are monotonous and tightly controlled. There is no evidence of organized activity or influence from him inside the prison walls. Zacarias Moussaoui. The 20th hijacker, Zacarias Moussaoui, a French national of Moroccan descent, was convicted in 2006 as the only person tried in the U.S. for involvement in the 9/11's terrorist attacks. Prosecutors described him as the so-called 20th hijacker, though Moussaoui himself has given inconsistent statements about his role. DOJ, 2006, New York Times, 2010. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole and transferred to ADX Florence shortly thereafter. Court filings reveal that Moussaoui has attempted to use the legal system from within ADX to make statements and file unusual motions. In 2014, for instance, he wrote letters claiming knowledge of Saudi involvement in terrorism, though these statements were regarded as unreliable and inconsistent by officials. Reuters, 2015. As with other inmates, he remains under special administrative measures, designed to limit the possibility of further extremist communication. His confinement has been described by attorneys as one of the harshest in the U.S. penal system. Joaquin El Chapo Guzmán, the cartel kingpin. Perhaps the most internationally recognized inmate at ADX Florence is Joaquin Guzmán Loera, better known as El Chapo. As the leader of the Sinaloa cartel, he oversaw one of the most powerful drug trafficking organizations in the world. After multiple prison escapes in Mexico, one through a tunnel beneath his cell in 2015, Guzmán was extradited to the United States in 2017 and convicted in 2019 of drug trafficking, money laundering, and organized crime charges. Department of Justice, 2019. He was sentenced to life plus 30 years, Along with a forfeiture order of $12.60 billion at ADX Florence, Guzmán is considered an extreme escape risk. Journalistic sources, including the New York Times and Vice, report that he is held under extraordinary restrictions, including limited outdoor exercise and extremely controlled attorney visits. NYT, 2019, Vice, 2020. His lawyers argued in appeals that the harsh conditions amounted to cruelty, pointing to near-total isolation. However, the courts upheld his placement at ADX, citing his history of prison breaks and the danger he poses if allowed more freedom. Beyond the famous names. While these high-profile inmates attract headlines, ADX Florence also houses less publicized prisoners, gang leaders, violent escapees, and men who killed correctional officers in other prisons. For example, Thomas Silverstein, a member of the Aryan Brotherhood, spent decades in solitary at ADX before his death in 2019. He was once described by the Bureau of Prisons as one of the most dangerous inmates in the U.S. system after murdering multiple prisoners and a guard. Los Angeles Times, 2019. Others include leaders of organized crime groups, foreign spies convicted of passing nuclear secrets, and domestic terrorists whose names are less recognizable to the public but who are deemed equally high risk. Their stories rarely make headlines, but together, they form the hidden population that defines ADX Florence. The psychological toll. For all its reputation as the most secure prison in America, ADX Florence is equally infamous for the psychological toll it takes on inmates. Amnesty International's 2014 report, called Conditions at ADX, harsh and inhumane, warning that long-term isolation can cause mental breakdowns. Amnesty International, 2014. Similarly, Human Rights Watch, 2017, reported that prisoners subjected to 23-hour-a-day solitary confinement often experience anxiety, paranoia, hallucinations, and even suicidal thoughts. In fact, a 2012 class action lawsuit, Cunningham v. Bureau of Prisons, filed on behalf of mentally ill inmates, argued that ADX failed to provide adequate psychiatric care. The plaintiffs claimed that some inmates mutilated themselves or attempted suicide, driven by the extreme isolation. Court filings, 2012. The Bureau of Prisons acknowledged concerns, eventually reaching a settlement in 2016 that improved mental health screening and treatment for ADX inmates. New York Times, 2016. Still, critics argue that systemic problems remain unresolved in the case of Thomas Silverstein. Few cases illustrate the toll of extreme isolation better than that of Thomas Silverstein, an Aryan Brotherhood member incarcerated in the federal system after multiple murders, including the 1983 killing of a correctional officer. Los Angeles Times, 2019. Silverstein spent 36 years in solitary confinement, much of it at ADX Florence. In writings smuggled out through attorneys, he described the experience as a slow-motion death, noting that years without meaningful human contact eroded his sense of reality. Silverstein letters, cited by NPR, 2019. He died in 2019 at age 67, still under solitary restrictions. His case remains one of the starkest examples. Cited by human rights advocates when criticizing the U.S. government's use of isolation, the lawsuits and the reforms. The Cunningham lawsuit forced the Bureau of Prisons to confront allegations that mentally ill prisoners were being housed under conditions that worsened their symptoms. Plaintiffs included inmates who claimed they heard voices, suffered hallucinations, and engaged in self-harm, yet received little to no psychiatric care. In 2016, the settlement required the BOP to expand treatment programs, create specialized housing for inmates with severe mental illness, and improve staff training. Denver Post, 2016. Despite these reforms, watchdog groups continue to raise concerns. Reports in The Marshall Project, 2017, note that isolation practices at ADX remain largely unchanged for many inmates not classified as severely mentally ill. Critics argue that while reforms helped a subset of prisoners, the broader system of solitary confinement at ADX remains intact. Guard perspectives. While inmates describe isolation as unbearable, correctional officers often argue it is essential for safety. Interviews with former ADX staff published in 60 Minutes and the New York Times reveal a common theme. Many guards believe ADX prevents riots, killings, and organized gang activity that plagued other prisons in the 1980s, and 1990S.1 former guard told reporters that without ADX, the entire federal system would be unmanageable. New York Times, 2015. Another described the facility as a place of absolute control, noting that even a single mistake could put lives at risk, given the inmate population. Still, some officers privately admit the psychological decline of inmates is visible, men talking to themselves for hours, or staring blankly for days. Yet, as one guard stated, that's the price of keeping order. The silent struggles, journalistic accounts, including investigations by The Atlantic, 2012, and the New York Times, 2015, have documented inmates. Complaints about losing their sense of time, struggling with memory, and battling depression. Letters from inmates released through attorneys sometimes describe small coping mechanisms, doing push-ups, reading religious texts, or writing legal motions. But others paint darker pictures, cutting themselves just to feel alive, or fantasizing about suicide. What makes ADX unique is that these struggles often play out completely unseen. There are no cameras inside cells, and few outsiders ever gain access. For most inmates, the outside world never learns their daily reality. Special Administrative Measures, SAMs. One of the strictest tools used inside ADX Florence is Special Administrative Measures, or SAMs. These restrictions, authorized by the U.S. Attorney General, are applied when an inmate's communications are deemed a potential threat to national security or public safety. DOJ Regulations, 28 CFR Section 501.3. Under SAMs, inmates' contact with the outside world is tightly limited. Letters are read and censored before delivery, phone calls are rare and heavily monitored, and even legal communications can be restricted to prevent coded messages. As of 2019, SAMs were applied to only a handful of inmates nationwide, but most of them are held at ADX Florence, New York Times, 2019. This includes men like Ramzi, Yousef, Richard Reid, and El Chapo. The goal is simple: to ensure that dangerous leaders cannot orchestrate violence from behind bars. But for the inmates, SAMs mean living in almost total silence, attempts to communicate. Despite these controls, history has shown that inmates sometimes try to circumvent restrictions. Investigative reports by The Washington Post, 2014, noted cases where inmates attempted to send coded messages through legal mail. In other instances, prisoners used attorneys or intermediaries to try and pass information, though such claims are often difficult to verify. There are also long-standing rumors of pipe talk, where inmates tap messages through plumbing or vents. While former guards have acknowledged hearing tapping noises, the Bureau of Prisons has never confirmed this practice publicly. Most reports of inmate communication beyond SAMs remain unconfirmed or speculative. The case of the blind sheikh. One of the most controversial cases of inmate communication involved Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman, also known as the Blind Sheikh, who was convicted for his role in plots to bomb New York landmarks in the 1990s. DOJ, 1995. Although Rahman died in 2017 at a different federal facility, his time under SAMs is often cited in debates about their necessity. In the late 1990s, Rahman's attorney was caught passing messages from him to followers outside prison, urging further attacks. U.S. v. Lynn Stewart, 2005. This incident reinforced the government's view that even total isolation could not completely prevent extremist influence. For many, it justified the continuation of SAMs at ADX Florence. Influence without contact. Even under the strictest isolation, the names of ADX inmates carry influence beyond the walls. For example, El Chapo's mere incarceration in the U.S. was seen as a symbolic victory for law enforcement in the global war on drugs. NYT 2019. Zacarias Moussaoui's courtroom outbursts and legal filings continued to make headlines years after his transfer to ADX. Reuters 2015. The stories of long-term inmates like Thomas Silverstein became touchstones in debates about solitary confinement and prison reform. LA Times, 2019. These men may no longer command armies, cartels, or terror cells directly, but their very presence at ADX continues to influence policy, law enforcement strategy, and even international relations. The cost of silence. While SAMs succeed in silencing inmates from directing outside operation, Critics argue they also erase any possibility of rehabilitation. Prisoners like El Chapo or Moussaoui will likely spend the rest of their lives in conditions where their voices are never heard again. Not even in monitored interviews. Human rights groups such as Amnesty International argue this silence comes at a cost. Society loses visibility into the human impact of isolation, and inmates are denied even the smallest measure of human dignity. Amnesty, 2014. For supporters, however, that silence is the point. ADX. Florence is not designed for second chances. It is designed to make dangerous men disappear. ADX. Florence remains one of the most secretive prisons in the world, a place where silence is enforced, and the lives inside are rarely seen. If you found this look behind the walls informative, don't forget to subscribe for more documentaries that uncover hidden truths from inside the world's most notorious prisons. Thank you for watching.